Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mad Army Podcast. And here we are talking about the XFL Week 5. Woo! This was insane. I am shocked on how things have played out. Just in disbelief. I can't believe it. There was controversy. There was down-to-the-wire action. There was low-scoring games. There was high-scoring games. There was comeback rallies. There was great defense. There was terrible offense, terrible defense at certain points. Holy cow. We're going to talk about it. There's even a controversy with the referee. Or the referees. But first up, I will put up the standings right now. There's the standings for you. From what it's showing on the website, it seems that the Defenders have the differentials to be considered first, the Battlehawks are considered to be second, and the Guardians are being considered to be third. Furthermore, the Roughnecks look like they're going to continue to run away with it in the West, 5-0. Renegades and Wildcats now tied 2-3. Dragons are one behind. What I will say while I have these standings up here is if the Roughnecks are going to run away with the West, then I'm really hoping that the three bottom teams make it as competitive as possible for that second spot and really try to make it interesting. In the case of the Wildcats, so far so good. In terms of the East, if you wanted a close division war, you got it for now at least through Week 5. Alright, with that, let's get into the video. First up, the Dragons took on the Roughnecks. Roughnecks won 32-23. And first up, before we move any further, basically the Roughnecks had I think it was like fourth and, I can't remember the amount of yardage. It was fourth down. I think there was like 6 seconds left. And PJ Walker hiked the ball and he knelt down. Now keep in mind, 9 points in the XFL is a one-possession game. If you score a touchdown, you get 6, and then a 3-point conversion. And he knelt down. Turnover on down. Now you might say, but Matt, how much time was left? 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Now, I hear the argument, the odds that they'll get the touchdown are slim. Yes, but I firmly believe that the down should have been played. I think it was a bad judgment call. I think the XFL made a statement apologizing for it. Can't remember the details, but I think that was probably, aside from a few questionable decisions that have been made in the reviews, at least what I'm glad when we hear the reviews or the booth reviews is we get the back and forth conversation. You hear the reasoning, the logic, so then you can argue, about the conversation rather than just, well, how do they even make that call? So I appreciate that. When it comes to this, I think it was their first really, really, really big mistake, really big error on the staff's part. But nonetheless, I think when it comes to this game, basically B.J. Daniels, I think it's B.J. Daniels for the Dragons. He had 114 yards, 64% on passing completion. He was 14-22. Meanwhile, in the rushing, Farrow led with 10 attempts, 30 yards. And then Daniels himself ran 30 yards and 10 attempts as well. He got 2 touchdowns. Williams rushed 28 yards, got 1 touchdown. So the rushing game got the touchdowns, but from a weird kind of perspective, it didn't feel like they traveled very far. This almost makes me wish I had more notes to talk about it, but they had like 2 interceptions, I think, so their defense certainly helped them pick up some of those situations, but I apologize, I need to start writing notes, because after 2 days, and watching 4 games, you kind of just lose it all in a haze. But Austin Prohl, the wide receiver for the Dragons, had 56 receiving yards and 3 catches. Well done. As for the Roughnecks, PJ Walker, 71% completion rating. I think this might be his second best completion percentage, his passer rating was 104.2 for anybody that cares. He was 27 for 38 through 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. Those picks were critical. bad decision. Cam Phillips, before I even go to the rushing, was killing it with 10 receptions, 122 yards, 2 touchdowns. They are a dynamic duo. I keep saying this. Or I haven't said it too much on my podcast because it felt like they got shut down the week before, but they are a dynamic duo. Be careful. Number 11 and 14 on the Roughnecks. Dynamic duo. Be careful. Watch out. The Dragons, it felt like, oh yeah, by the way, Williams led in the rushing with 54 yards, 10 attempts, no touchdowns, and then Butler got 2 touchdowns, 52 yards rushing. And truly, the Dragons blew this game. It felt like it. They just let everything slip to their fingers at the end. They had the Roughnecks on the ropes, and it just fell through. It happens. I hope the Dragons recover. I think they've got a pretty decent team. I think Butler's a better fit for their quarterback than Silvers. We'll have to see. And once again, I really feel like, and I even said this too while I'm watching the game. I said this feels like the Roughnecks occasionally, or it's becoming apparent that they will struggle to get their gears firing, and then some way, somehow, they will will themselves to win by the skin of their teeth. And it feels like it here once again. It feels like they dodged a bullet. Which, if you are the number 1 team, 5-0, I think that's great because it's not like you're killing and murdering the other teams. But, gosh dang it, it feels like every single time a team looks great against them, and then somehow the Roughnecks will their team to victory. But, the controversial call, I disagree with it. But, whatever. What do I know about football? All right, next up on the list, the Guardians pulled out the win against the Dallas Renegades, 30-12. One thing that should be said is Landry Jones for the Renegades is out on injury. I think he's projected to be out for 2 weeks. I'm nervous for that. I don't, only because I get RG3 flashbacks. I really don't want that to get worse. So don't rush him into the role again, or don't rush him back. Take your time with it. Make sure that he's good and ready to go. The Guardians seem to get their crap together after 2 weeks. Not 2 weeks. They did win last week. But I will say, Perez, despite McGroin being out on injury, has done a pretty solid job leading this team. Despite shaky kind of passing game for him. Didn't do too terrible. He was 16 for 30 with 53% passing completion percentage. 229 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. In the rushing game, Victor, number 27, with 58 yards. Stockton with 41. In terms of the catching, Pearson with 95 yards. McKay with 67. Redding with 46. I think they did a solid job. I think that they've started to turn it around under Perez. We'll have to see who they go with because I think McGroin is projected to come back. Or McGloin, excuse me. I don't know how I get those two confused. I think that we'll have to see who they go with next week. I think it's a tough choice. You might go with Perez, even though he's kind of shaky with the passing game. I think he's showing to be fairly decent. Same thing with Nelson. I feel like these two backups are fairly decent with their jobs. It's just, if they dork up, it's big. And in the case of Nelson, 2 picks. I feel like he's a good passer, but then he just crumbles. Like when the interceptions or the fumbles happen, it really, really burns him. I mean, he threw 1 pick, it tipped off of a lineman right up to himself, and the lineman ran it back for 6. That sucks. That really sucks. Nelson threw 28 for 49, 57%, 210 yards, 2 interceptions. Artis Payne, my gosh, I will say, he knows how to fight for yards. There are several running backs on this list, and I might forget it or might be confusing some names, but I know Artis Payne has been, despite you reading or you hearing 25 yards, I will say he was plowing through people. You cannot keep the man down. Nagel, I think, is the name. 7 catches, 46 yards. Martino was 36, 34 for Parham, I think. Yikes, I'm going to butcher these names and then I'm going to get crap for it later. So pretty spread out in the passing game. I think it was fine. In terms of the Renegades, they just couldn't get anything going. It's frustrating. I get it. Don't worry. The Defenders just had it last week. Just because you're down, you're certainly not out. Keep fighting for that second spot in the division. And best of luck next week. That's all you can really do. We go to the next game. DC Defenders and Battlehawks. If you wanted I want to say more defensive game. Truly a defensive game for the Defenders. Wow, that was impressive. This felt like a complete 180, and when I read off these stats, I'll have stuff to add on afterwards. Defenders won 15-6. It's still a one-possession game. It's Amu. It was 15 for 25, 60%, 174 yards. Jones, number 24, 70 yards rushing. Michael with 69. The rushing game works. The rushing game is good. The rushing game is dominant. They have a fairly competent and decent quarterback who is shown to be consistent. I think this is his first bad game, if you were going to call this a bad game, for Ta'amu. He had so much pressure on him from the Defenders, it was just overwhelming, I think, for him. I mean, they just tore him up. And still, with completing 60%, I think that's a fairly decent job with what he had. In terms of receiving, he prioritized Washington. 5 catches, 114 yards. Russell, the next guy, 27 yards. I mean, it was insane how many yards Washington got. But if you're going to talk about one thing that both teams certainly had, it was the rushing game worked for both teams. They were tearing each other up with the rushing. We switch over to the Defenders. Cardale Jones started off. He went 0 for 2 and threw 1 pick on that first drive, and then went straight to the backup. Jackson threw 9 for 14, 64%, 39 yards, 1 touchdown. And you might be sitting here and asking yourself, Matt, isn't that really bad? Yes, well, Olsen was highlighting how bad the passing game was. But here's the thing that I want to point out. When you have this, and I'm going to read off the stats, I would do this too and prioritize this. The rushing game. Presley, 15 attempts, 107 yards, 7.1 yards per carry. Pumphrey, 15 attempts, 37 yards. That's 2.5. Jackson rushed 4.6 on average with 7 attempts, 32 yards. Tompkins, 1 attempt, 28 yards. Rogers, 2 attempts, 25 yards. The rushing game was tearing it up. Prioritize that, because it kept working over and over and over. They kept running the ball down the Battlehawks' throat. I almost said Blackhawks. They kept running it down their throat. I do what works. Screw trying to pad the stats. The objective is to win. Jackson was showing that he could throw short, accurate passes. I think he did a decent job with that. They really didn't throw much at all. Lee led with 3 receptions, 14 yards. Presley with 3 catches, 12 yards. But the defense for the Defenders tore up. I mean, they had 4 sacks in comparison to the Battlehawks, who had 1. Anu, I think it's Anau. Gosh, I'm sorry if I butchered it. Johnson, number 97, the guy who has the earring. He's entertaining as always to listen to. I mean, it's just insane. They were tearing him up. 4 sacks, and if you might think that's not that great, but in terms of between the two, Battlehawks had 4 tackles for loss. Defenders had 7. On top of that, if you just watch the game, I mean, it's just pressure all the time on Ta'amu. It was like they were suffocating him. Whoever's running that defense for DC, keep it going, because that was great. I don't know what you guys did to change that, but it was awesome. For the Defenders, I mean, you just didn't get in the end zone. It's my favorite team. So, nonetheless, it was a complete 180 for the Battlehawks, but still had a fairly decent game. It's just they couldn't get in the end zone. Ta'amu is probably the best quarterback in the league, next to PJ Walker. Frustrating game for him, but I think that they can recover from it. Going on to the last game. Oh boy. This one shocked me. Because I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I don't understand. How are you letting this happen? 41-34 Wildcats win over the Vipers. You might sit here and say, wow, that's really high scoring. You are darn right. I was stunned. On the passing game, I mean, they were chucking up big bombs to each other on each side of the field for big yards. On top of that, it was just turnovers burned both teams. I mean, it was fumbles. I don't know if I can find the fumble stats, but it was fumbles, interceptions would just cost the Vipers. You're telling me, and to put this in perspective, I think it was like 4 minutes left in the second quarter. The Vipers are up 24-6. I think that's where we're around the time interval. They proceed to get a field goal. So 3 points in the process where the Wildcats go on a 35-point rampage. Within that mixture, the Vipers managed to get a field goal, and then they scored, I think, in the final 4 minutes. And then to add more drama, they drove down the field and threw an interception in the end zone with a final with 30 seconds left. Here's the thing. I don't like too many high-scoring games because it kind of rips up the defense, but the defense put in work this game. It wasn't like always, oh, there's a fumble or it just felt so competitive. The defense showed up to play for both teams. I think this was a slugfest, and the added drama of the Wildcats being at home, you're getting slaughtered in the first half, only to come back, I think was epic. Gosh dang, I enjoyed it so much. That was so much fun to watch. All these games were pretty good, aside from, I think the weakest game was the Guardians and the Renegades. It was just kind of there. Defenders were a whole other thing. And the Renegades had the controversy, but this game felt like a slugfest. Anyways, enough pandering to this game. Let's get into the stats. Cornelius for the Vipers got his crap together. Holy cow. I think he threw 22 for 34, 65%. He threw 300 yards. 8.8 yards per attempt. He threw 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, passer rating of 87.9. The rushing game, Smith tore it up with 69 yards and 24 attempts. Not too good on the average with 2.9. Cornelius got 6.4 on average with 7 attempts, 45 yards. In terms of receiving, Tolliver, oh my goodness, some critical catches by him. Horn was really good. Williams was good on the catching. Tolliver with 4 receptions, 95 yards, 1 touchdown. Horn, 9 catches, 90 yards. 1 touchdown. Williams, 5 catches, 86 yards. Jeez. I mean, they were tearing it up. Patrick had some really explosive runs. He did pretty well there from what I saw, despite only getting 23 yards rushing and 1 touchdown. Oh, man, what a good performance in terms of the offense. I think the Vipers have a really powerful offense, but then they either make a lot of mistakes on the offense or their defense can't hold. It is a mixture. They just fall apart when it matters most. And it's frustrating because I think that they have the structure, they have the skeleton for a solid team, but they don't have all the vital organs to just cross the finish line. In terms of the Wildcats, way to hang into the fight. Oh my gosh, the passing game was destructive. 20 for 36 by Johnson, 56%, 288 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. In the rushing game, Johnson actually led himself. 7 attempts, 19 yards rushing. In terms of the passing, Smallwood, 86 yards in 4 catches. Blacknail, 78 yards, 3 catches, 1 touchdown. McBride, 3 catches, 35 yards, 1 touchdown. Barnes, 3 catches, 26 yards, 1 touchdown. And then I think Hampton was the other one. He had 14 yards. But the biggest catches, Smallwood and Blacknail, the bombs. 48 yards was that long catch, and then 54. Absolutely insane. The turnovers were ridiculous on each side. I think there was like fumble recoveries into the end zone, or fumble recoveries that led to a touchdown. the big guy who got the one fumble recovery into the end zone was hilarious. He was just running around. It was great. But gosh, what a game. That was awesome. All right. So, final remarks. I want to say the defenders had that cup train. I'll try to find a photo for it right here for you. It was hilarious to see. I just had fun looking at it. Don't know what it was about, but thought it was great. Oliver Luck was participating with it, handing them a cup. I think they almost reached 2,000 cups from what the count was. It was awesome. Officiating happens. Just don't. Yeah, I was kind of upset by it, but at the same time, I'm just like, you know what? Everybody's human. Everybody makes mistakes. The NFL does it too. NCAA has done it before. No sense in like crying and whining about how this is like the black mark of the league. Okay. If I'm missing, also, side note, if I missed anything or if you guys have any comments or want to hear my thoughts about something that I'm forgetting, because this is like a day removed from Sunday and I'm having a hard time remembering everything, fire it in the comments section and I can try to answer it. Because I'm a mess with my thoughts. This is why I need notes. But what I will say is time to pass on my Game of the Week award. And I believe I will give this to the Vipers and Wildcats game. I think the Dragons and Renegades were close. Defenders and Battlehawks were pretty solid, but I felt like it was more one-sided dominance by the defenders. But this game, just the ultimate comeback by the Wildcats. I loved every second of it. Awesome job. And way to have a nail-biting final drive by the Vipers. Fantastic. I enjoyed it. I mean, even the Dragons had that final drive, but this game, just the comeback rally back into it was so epic. Congratulations to the Wildcats fans. You guys deserved a win. Awesome job. And yeah, so next week it looks like the Roughnecks will face the Guardians. Battlehawks will face the Vipers. The Renegades will take on the DC Defenders, and the Wildcats will take on the Dragons. So those are here's the scores for the week again, just so you guys all see it in one picture. Thank you all for watching. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel, of course, if you wish. You don't have to if you don't want to. Hopefully you guys keep supporting this series, because the people who do tune into this, that keep racking it up over 100 views per video, I want to thank everybody, because I was originally only doing this for like the first week, and it exploded. So I want to thank everybody for the support, and I'll keep doing it as long as it's supported. So thank you guys so much, and I hope to see you all next time. But most importantly, and as always, suit up, Mad Army.